everybody, this is Stu Smith with another Tactical Fitness Report, but we are starting another To, Through, and After series with Master Chief Steve Drum, former Navy SEAL, and he's doing great things now that we will talk about on the back half. But the way this works is we are going to go to, through, and after your life, Steve. So first of all, thank you for coming on. I appreciate you giving your time.
Hey, Stu, thanks for having me back on. I know we talked a couple weeks ago, but yeah, I'm really excited to get into this portion of it.
All right. So, Steve, like many recruits that go into this journey of going into special ops, you were first a high school kid somewhere and you had a big dream. Like how did that just show itself to you one day when you were a teenager?
Yeah, I think it starts even before that. Even when I was a little kid, I was obsessed, right, with a lot of people that are listening to this playing Army in the woods. And in fact, Army was the direction that I was thinking. I think I saw, like, when I was little, I saw like the Green Berets with John Wayne. And I was like, wow, that looks, and I started getting really, more educated on SEALs in Vietnam and thinking about all the things that they did going across the border with the Mac VSOB, the VSOG operations, and just super secret, super dangerous. And those guys were like my heroes. As I got into high school and I really started thinking about putting the plan in action, I also had an uncle in my ear. He was a retired naval aviator and an American Airlines pilot. And he kind of was like, why don't you join the Army? But hey, consider the Navy. They have special operations forces too. They're called SEALs. And in fact, I read a historical fiction book about SEALs in Vietnam. And then I learned more about the selection process. And I thought it was kind of cool that it was part of the Navy. And I realized that unlike special forces training at the time, you could go to BUD/S, go to boot camp, go to BUD/S training right off the get-go and get right into it. And so I'm like, you know what? And I kind of figured, hey, this is probably the toughest selection process. That's what I thought at the time. This is the toughest selection process out there. Let me go do that. And so by the time I was probably like in 9th or 10th grade, I was kind of committed. I thought maybe I was going to go the officer route, but my uncle, who wanted me to be a naval officer, he kind of was like, look, here's the thing. If all you want to do is be a SEAL, then you should enlist. And that's what I chose to do. I joined the delayed enlistment program at 17.
Wow. So, that's funny when you mentioned you're a kid playing Army. Nobody plays Navy when they're a little kid.
Nope.
Though I do remember getting my first mask and fins. In fact, here's an old picture of me. My mask and fins here. 8 years old playing Frogman. I didn't even know what a Frogman was back then. I got my first little fins and flippers and a mask on. That is good times. But I agree with you. Sometimes this calling starts very early with people. As a young kid, always kind of driven towards that, calling to serve. A personal for me, what made me choose between Army and Navy, and all my family was Army. Both granddads, World War II, Korean War, uncles, dad in Vietnam, all Army. And I just chose the Navy because I'm an 18-year-old kid and I'm going to do something different, right?
Yeah.
But I did one thing that I thought was very very wise for an 18-year-old, is I looked where I would be living after I graduated. Right? And think about all the Navy bases compared to all the Army bases.
Right? You're right. I think my only caveat, my only pushback to that is, man, if I served in the 10th Special Forces Group, I could have retired out of Colorado and not Chicago.
Colorado is very nice. I will say there are some very nice Army bases. The ones in Germany are incredible.
Exactly.
So there's some very nice Army bases. I just joke around with the Army guys sometimes. So let's talk about this 17-year-old kid goes into the recruiter. How was that process for you? Because it's not easy for a 17-year-old kid going into the recruiter most times, because they can get taken advantage of by most recruiters.
And I believe I did to a point. but we'll talk about how that actually probably played in my favor. So, right, not only are the recruiters under pressure to meet their numbers, they got to get you in the door. In fact, before you have a contract, you have to sign. Before you have a Warrior Challenge contract, you have to sign on a dotted line for some kind of random rate, whatever you may qualify. And from then, hopefully you earn a contract. But for me, I always make this joke. I was not the smartest kid. And I don't know if I was dumber because I was really, really bad at math. And when I took the ASVAB, I actually failed to qualify for SEAL training by just a couple of points. Or I was dumber because I believed the recruiter when he said, oh, that's just a couple of points. They're going to waiver that. Just go ahead and go. It'll be no problem. Right. So kind of can guess where that story's going.
Yeah. That could go sideways real quick. So, yeah, how did you get over that hurdle? Because that is a big one that a lot of people ask me about. Hey, I don't quite meet on the ASVAB. What should I do? Should I take it again? Can I take it again before I go into boot camp? Or can I retake it later? So how did you get around this?
I would, if possible, and I would imagine that if you miss that qualification by a couple of points, if it were me, I can't imagine them not allowing you to take it. Now, maybe you got to wait 3-6 months. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I would definitely advise retaking that ASVAB. Now, here's what happened to me. I show up, I go to boot camp, and my drill instructor, my recruit division commander, RDC, let me go take the SEAL training swim test, the qualification
test. This was in the 90s.
This was 1992.
Yes.
So /93.
They don't do that way anymore, right?
No, they had the dive fair program, but not at the boot camp that I went to. There was 3 boot camps. I went to Great Lakes, the one that still exists today. The one day he lets me go, and the guy decides he's going to show up to work late that day, and I missed my only opportunity. Not that I would have been accepted because I missed the score, and then they're just like, oh, we'll just wait till you go to your A school, which at the time was Hull Maintenance Technician A school in Philadelphia. So I go to Philadelphia, and they're like, there's nobody here that can help you out. There's nobody here that can give you a screening test. There's no SEALs here or divers. Go to your first duty station. Now, I was wise enough and I wasn't a rock star. Like, I'm not a work with your hands kind of welder guy, so I didn't really finish the top of my class. But I finished high enough to be able to have some choice in where I got sent. All the people in the class are all excited to go to the brand new destroyers or Japan or whatever. I'm like, you know what? Give me that shore duty billet in Groton, Connecticut, because at least I can run, I can swim, I can train. And so that's what I did. I ended up working on nuclear submarines up in Groton, Connecticut for 2 years. And I fell in with a guy, a former SEAL who took his original job, photographer's mate. He basically got out of the SEAL team so he could be closer to his family, his kids, after he and his wife divorced in the New England area. So he trained us, a bunch of us, every day. And so,
nice.
I would say that whole thing really worked to my benefit because I don't think that I had the maturity. Had I gone in, I don't know ultimately how successful I was. So I think that extra 2 years of seasoning and physical preparation, I really think that played in my benefit because ultimately I was fortunate enough to be healthy and make it through the class I started buds with.
Nice. So just so everybody knows, this process is called a lateral transfer, right? Or how did you get orders to go to buds as being a hull tech in Groton, Connecticut?
Yeah, good question. Back then, you just put in, it's difficult now. I know nowadays or years later, it became about your year group, how long, and I never really understood that. But back then, it was like, hey, you want to volunteer for the program, then put your whole package together. And it was a huge pain in the butt. You had a lot of people at the command that were like, I even had one guy say, why should I even approve you? We just sent 5 guys. None of them made it. Why should I even waste my time? So you have people throwing a lot of resistance. It really is. It takes a lot of perseverance just to make sure that all your stuff gets through, that you find a way to get all your dive physical done. And so I had to go through a lot of hurdles just to get, and I would call every day to BUPERS in DC and say, where are we? And finally, right as I was coming up, I think I stayed a little past 2 years. And right as I was coming up, like I had orders to go to Buds in the fall.
Nice. So when you went to Buds, what were you? Were you a E4?
I was an E4.
Okay, gotcha. Did did you make E5 while you're going through Buds or anything like that?
So it's funny when I graduated Buds, they allowed me to do, I think it was called the STAR program, where you could automatically get promoted if you signed on. And so they pinned me E5. And then when I got to the SEAL team, they're like, you don't even have enough time in raid as an E4. And they took my rank back.
Oh, damn.
Yeah. And then I got it back again after
Wow. So let's talk about your Bud story. How did that go? This guy, luckily you had a nice mentor who was training you guys prior to it. Did you feel pretty well prepared?
For the most part, I think the one thing, like I ran, and I'm not saying this was the smartest thing. When I was training, I would work out about 2-3 times a day. First thing in the morning, almost every morning, I would run 5 miles in high-tech boots. You know, they were really good boots for running. I'd run those every morning, pretty much rain or shine. Lunch, we would use that group I told you about. We would get together and we would do some PT. Maybe we would do a swim, but a lot of just pull-ups. And there was a big hill that we would run up and do that kind of stuff, or just go for runs, like run and PT, maybe a swim. And then a lot of times in the evening, I would go over to the Coast Guard Academy, which is like my little country club, right? And I'd go and I'd get in the pool, or I'd lift weights or something like that. So I felt generally well prepared, right? I was not prepared for the soft sand running. That really kicked my butt. Now, the good thing is, as you know, most of your time runs, right? You're going to have really crappy beach conditions, but most of your time runs are going to be on hard pack, which I had no problem with because I kind of have a bounce stride, and I wasn't great, but I could pass almost all of them. But when it came to the conditioning runs, and it's like that powder sand, man, I was always in the back. I was always in the goon squad. In fact, in first phase, I think it was first phase. I think me and this other officer, another guy, super slow. He was a phenomenal swimmer, though, super slow. And as you're running down the beach, they basically will raise their hand and when he drops the hand, anybody behind that hand, then you're in the goon squad. It was the one run he and I made it right under that. And then we go ahead, we're like, woohoo, we high-five it. You two, get back here. You're in the goon squad just for celebrating. So, yeah.
Now, what year did you go through Buds?
95, 96.
Okay, gotcha. I went through in 91. I was trying to think if I knew any of those guys at that time.
But here's the thing, though. People often ask me about Hell Week. They're like, was Hell Week the hardest part? And I think mentally, maybe, in terms of like gearing up, because
the anxiety of Hell Week was much worse than Hell Week.
Right. I think, I always looked at SEAL training as this mythical beast, right? So I suffered confidence issues, right? Oh, I don't know if I could do that. I don't know. I mean, do I even belong here? I had it built up to be this huge, insurmountable mountaintop, yet it never got quite as hard as I had built it up in my mind. And by the time, Hell Week came around, I was in the goon squad pretty much every single conditioning run. So it's like almost like an intro to Hell Week. You're already getting extra. I was one of the slowest swimmers when it came to like doing like breaststroke and all those crazy things that I'd never done in my life. So when you do these relay races in the pool, I was like always the last one getting out. So I was already getting a little bit more heat than maybe a lot of the other one was. But to me, the hardest part of Buds, I think, was probably the first week, maybe first 2 weeks, right?
Yeah,
where they really try to get rid of all the weaklings.
Yeah. I mean, it is a mass exodus of people in those now it's like the first 3 weeks, 3 weeks before Hell Week, you'll lose, I don't know, 60% of your class. And then you'll lose another 50% of your class during Hell Week. And then after Hell Week, it's rare that you lose people. I mean, I think lose some, but the mass exodus is getting through those first 4 weeks.
And I think the one thing that separates Buds from a lot of the other selection processes is the length. Yeah. Right? You've always heard that cliche. Anybody in decent physical condition can make through 1 day of SEAL training. But when when you don't even are not even close to seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, like mentally that screws with you. But once it's kind of like we were just discussing, once Hell Week starts, it's almost like, all right, here we go. And you know that it's going to end on Friday, despite them like telling you, oh, maybe we're going to extend your Hell Week longer, whatever. You know it's going to end Friday. And so it's like you're able to kind of, for me, I was able to kind of really wrap my head around. I'm like, I could, despite the confidence issues I had, and I even had some after Hell Week when it came to things like land navigation, I felt like the one area that I was kind of a level of confidence was making it through that. So, yeah.
That's cool. So, the other tactical phases, when you're going through dive phase and land warfare phase, how did that one compare to your first phase?
Yeah. So it's funny the way I describe the way it's broken down is this is Steve Drum's opinion, right? The first one, Bud's first phase essentially tests two things, right? It's your level of commitment.
Sure.
It's your level of commitment. And fundamentally, right, there's elements of, basic composure in water tests. But fundamentally, it's how committed, how much intestinal fortitude do you have to push past the limits that your body says, I can't go any further. And two, how well will you collaborate when you're faced with, setback, adversity, pain, misery? Will you still put the needs of your teammate, of your boat crew, of the mission above your own personal sense of suffering? And so it's all that physical piece. Now, when you get to dive phase, it's more about acute level of pressure, because the second major obstacle that you face in SEAL training is pull competency or pull comp. And so that's not about gutting through it. That's about being able to really lower your arousal, right? Performance psychology, and really be in the moment and being able to have the poise to go through the procedures that you've been trained. But believe it or not, the closest I came to failing out SEAL training, as I mentioned before, I didn't qualify for the ASVAB for math. Was dive physics.
Yeah.
I failed it. And luckily I had a Naval Academy guy, and we didn't even like each other at all. He actually tutored me, and I got through it, and I passed. So I didn't get rolled.
Oh, that's nice.
And then just to finish that thought, third phase, in my opinion, is all about assessing whether you can be trusted with weapons, whether with explosives. Can you be trusted to perform? Do you have a situational awareness to be able to do tactics and think through problems?
That's a really good analysis of third phase, because there's some gut check events in there, physical, but really
without question,
it comes down to how you handle weapons and situations and patrolling and situational awareness. All of those things are acutely monitored. And there are some people who get kicked out third phase because of safety violations.
That's where you lose. That's where we lost. I don't know if we lost anybody. I think we may have lost somebody for performance, but we lost several people for safety issues and also accompanying integrity issues within that, like trying to cover up for a mistake, basically a safety mistake, a safety violation.
Cheating on land nav. That's never a good idea.
No, we didn't get that. We didn't get cheating in land nav. I don't think we got anybody kicked out on that, but yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes that happens often. Like, when they tell you don't take the roads and you get caught taking the roads, and then you lie about not taking the roads.
Right.
Not a good process of, it's just sometimes that happens, and it's sad to see that guy made it that far and it just had a really big integrity issue that occurred there or something. I'm not sure exactly what you would call that, but it was, it happens.
Yeah. And I think it's like, have that old expression, if you ain't cheating, you ain't trying. And I think people take a lot of artistic license with that, a little bit too much.
A little bit too much. You're right.
It comes from, I think, the frogman days of Vietnam. It's like, let's do everything that goes against what's expected of how to conduct warfare conventionally. Let's do whatever if that means being chest deep in leech infested waters going through a swamp that nobody else would do and getting in there, like that's cheating in the sense that you wouldn't expect other people to do it, right? It's those type of things, being able to do what is not expected, what others aren't willing to do. But sometimes people take that to mean, oh, I can just, lack integrity in my decision making.
No, I love that, because you're exactly right. The way I always looked at it too was, how can I make this not a fair fight?
Exactly.
Right? When you're going into a situation, you want to make it not fair for the other, the other guys. And
that's right. That's much better said.
Well, thanks. All right. So now you make it through buds. Back then they had STT, not SQT.
That's right.
Right. So you more of a group trained. Were you an East Coast or West Coast guy?
East Coast my whole career.
Oh, wow. Nice. Yeah, we did our STT and I guess AP Hill.
Mm-hmm.
Were you guys in AP Hill? And
we were. So you go down back then. The difference is back then to listeners. Right now we have SEAL qualification training, and I can only presume that everybody kind of knows that. But back then, it was you go to your coast, and even back then, SEAL Team 4 had so many people that they ran their own STT. Right. But for us, it's like I got there and I was one of the more junior guys that checked into SEAL Team 2. And so I actually had to wait for the next class. So basically, I'm sitting at the team like training lackey, basically doing all the crap work for 6 months before I even get a chance to go to STT. So all the guys that were in my buds class that went, they all got their tridents before I did. But yeah, so it starts off with Puerto Rico, which is
that's good
diving. Yeah, Rosie Roads back in the day. Diving.
Fun time.
Yeah, a couple of weeks of diving followed by, maritime navigation, and then up to AP Hill, just as you described.
Yeah, that's good time. So you're at Team 2. So real quick in a snapshot, what were all the teams that you served in, throughout your 20 plus year career?
Yeah, so I started off with Team 2 and had orders to go to a special missions unit and got injured, and they'd made chief. That didn't work out for me. So I went to what's called training detachment, and I ran assault and close quarter combat, tactical shooting over there. Did that, came back to Team 2, did my platoon chief there. While I was at Trade, did another deployment to Iraq with Team 2, then went back to Team 2, and I was assigned it to Team 4 at some point administratively, even though I deployed with Team 2, and then so it says Team 4 in my record, and then ended up going to run the breacher school and a few other things. Then went to Team 10, did a deployment with them, and then did my troop chief deployment with them. That's the long and short of it. Did a staff job at Group 2, working for doing weapons and visual augmentation systems programming. And then from that, it was pretty much twilight of my career. Moved up to Great Lakes to work in the dive motivator, which some people may have heard of. It's dissolved temporarily, hopefully. And then got tagged with helping to develop this program for the big Navy called Warrior Toughness. So that was an interesting way. And that was it. That was a career.
That's when you retired.
Yeah, back in 2019.
Gotcha.
That's right.
So tell me this, how long were you in the SEAL team at Team 2 before 9/11 happened? Do you remember where you were at 9/11?
Yeah, so I mentioned how I got hurt. Literally, I was on deployment, and we were doing a training jump in Scotland, and I tore my shoulder and my pec, and basically took some bad advice, got surgery in a German hospital. I should have just gone back to Portsmouth and gotten it done. So I did that, flew home, and I was at home when 9/11 happened. The rest of the guys were still deployed to Europe, doing kind of some Kosovo stuff. And yeah, so that was it. I was licking my wounds after 9/11. So,
oh, wow. Yeah. So how long did that take before you were back able to deploy?
Yeah. So I went over to, it was a couple years, cause then I was doing Tradet. So I was there for like 2 years, and Yeah, almost 3 years. And I went to do my Iraq deployment with Team 4. I wasn't in that platoon. I jumped over there and went over there because the mission had changed from doing kind of direct action missions to PSD, the personal security detail for the fledgling Iraqi interim government. And so we did that piece. And then I was fortunate to go out on a bunch of sniper operations and things like that.
Okay, gotcha. So let's talk a little bit about your dive motivator piece.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people who listen to this are really interested about that boot camp process. And, you know, I think the military is kind of unique in two ways. With the Navy and the Air Force, there's nothing in the Navy and the Air Force that has a progression into special ops.
That's right.
Whereas, you know, you can go right from boot camp or basic military training in the Air Force and go straight into a special operations SOCOM level pipeline. But in the Army and the Marine Corps, you know, you have infantry, you have Rangers, you have recon, you have airborne. Yeah, you have all these different little stepping stones that allow you to get into the SOCOM level programs. So I was just wondering, you know, from a boot camp, Navy boot camp perspective, where do you see the most success in, you know, the kids going through boot camp these days?
Well, it's been a couple of years, and I think I touched on this, but they put on, when I was there in 2019, up to 2019, they had Buds Prep, which was across the street on the other two separate Great Lakes bases, the one where Recruit Training Command is boot camp, and then Naval Station Great Lakes on the other side. And that's where Buds Prep was. They first decided they were going to shift that over out to Coronado. And you know, it's a matter of really putting people, pulling them out of the rotation and putting them in some, you know, third location. So let's try to consolidate less billet, put more billets closer to the SEAL teams. And then they dissolved the dive motivator program. So back then it was 800 division. So let's just think in terms of, even though within the dive motivator, you had SEAL, SWIC, diver, EOD, air rescue swimmer. So if we look at just, let's use an example of SEAL SWIC, you would be in the same division, boot camp division. Right. So usually a lot more SEAL candidates than SWIC. You would go through boot camp, and then you would go to prep. And then at a certain point, you start basic orientation, and then you break up. So back then it was a matter of, you get a certain amount of workouts. Now you got to remember, you go to Navy boot camp, and I always would tell people this, don't just look at it as just some check in the block. Use it, because a lot of times you come out of high school, like, you're not used to taking specific instructions, processing them, and executing them to detail. So don't think about it as a matter of, oh, this is stupid, I'm stenciling my clothes, I'm folding, because you're going to have to one day deal with life-saving equipment, super things that need that fine attention to detail. Boot camp helps you learn that. So I always encourage people to get the most out of boot camp. It will help you if you look at it in that perspective, but you are going to miss a lot of workouts while you're at boot camp. You will not. Your performance will drop. You got to look at a lot of the condition that your average citizen joins the military, super bad levels of physical fitness. So you are going to drop. You know, you need to try to do stuff on your own, calisthenics when you can, push-ups, pull-ups when you can, and get to the workouts when you can. You still will be able to go and do dive motivator workouts there. So I don't know if that answered your question, but.
No, that's great, because you're right. You know, you do need to squeeze in a certain amount of calisthenics on your own. Hopefully there'll be another dive motivator / 800 division again. As of right now, there is not. But I think that was just a knee-jerk reaction to get everybody out of Great Lakes. And remember, this was also during COVID and everything. So it was just kind of a mess for everybody. So they just moved everything out to Coronado, and maybe they will realize that maybe, or maybe not. You know, I don't know if the 800 division is the right answer for the recruit. I've always said, look, the recruiter's job is not to get you into shape, right? It's just going to, the scout team and the mentors are going to test you in your PST. but it's up to you to get that PST up to a level that you can handle an 8-week deceleration of your training to be able to still be passing that test.
And
right. So you got to pass it with some gravy left in it.
And that's 100% true. And that's definitely things that I would tell when I have conversations, even when I was there, conversations with people that would be wanting, hey, can you talk to my nephew? Things like that. And the advice that I always said is you have to crush that PST. Yes. And we're very strict on the PST. We don't care if you can do 150 crappy push-ups. I just need you to do 50 perfect ones. And so it's all the way down, all the way up, elbows locked out. Pull-ups, it's your chin completely over the bar. So give yourself that buffer, because the first like week and a half to 2 weeks, you're going to be like doing nothing. You're not going to be able to even train. You're going to be getting your shots and in processing. So that's 2 weeks of almost no physical training. And so you are going to slide. And so then you're going to all of a sudden be given the PST. So if you don't have that buffer, you're not going to pass. Now, back then you would have several attempts to be able to pass it.
Yeah.
But, even when you get out of shape, the better shape you're in, the better shape and the easier it's going to get back to it, right? That muscle memory, not as much with cardio, but with the muscle, performance, you're going to be able to get back with relative ease at being you're in your 20s.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because one, they don't have the 800 division anymore, so you don't take the PST at boot camp as of right now. But
they're not. Okay.
Yeah, you'll take it at prep now. But if you go in there with a certain level of high level of fitness on that PST level, you degrade a little bit, but you're right. You quickly get back to where you were, and you're in sunny California. You can train all the time. You can really pick it back up during that prep phase, but you still have to pass that PST when you get to prep. So yeah, it is an issue that a lot of people's Spec Ops dream end on that first PST.
And I would say, and then so that's also, but it's a more holistic too. That's when your limitations for sleep and nutrition are not the best. But if you want to maximize your performance, then you've got to consider those things. So when you get sleep whenever you can get sleep, when you're in prep, you should be able to sleep. You're not really going to be doing a whole lot of night stuff. So get sleep, be really smart with your macros and what you're eating, the quality of your food as best you can. And so that's going to make a difference.
Yeah, that makes a huge difference. Really good point, because I would always, eat the chow hall food, and then between that chow hall evening meal and bedtime, I'd try to find something else, maybe one of those nice Southern California burritos, something that, just carb me up and get me ready for the next day. And, when you're burning a lot of calories, it's nice to be able to put in some calories and, maintain what you got versus just fall apart.
Yeah, but it's important. Like, you can't just eat crap. Like, you gotta eat a lot. Like, if you're doing hard workouts, you got to get a lot of protein in.
Yes.
And you want to get decent fats, not just all crap fats.
Yep.
And then you get all that done, and you want to eat some crap on top of that for calories. Sure. Go have at it. That's one of the luxuries of burning that many calories.
That is true.
You can't eat that way when you're in your 40s.
No, you cannot. When I was 22 and I was out working my bad diet for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's go back to this final piece that you were in the Navy real quick, because that is kind of like the stepping stone to what you're doing now. So let's talk about your last job in the Navy, and exactly how did that transpire with what you're doing now?
Yeah. So I was about a year and a half out from retirement, which would have been at the time, 2018. I would have been retiring in 2018, and I'm working the dive motivator piece. Now, as an aside, probably about 6 months prior, I'm trying to remember exactly what part of the Navy it was. I want to say it was, anyway, there was a high level leadership that went through and looked at all of boot camp. They looked at, all right, how are we training our sailors? And they looked at incidences in the fleet where maybe ships collided or there was missiles being fired at a ship, and our sailors just were not responding. A lot of them were combat ineffective. A lot of people join, this is the regular Navy. They join the Navy so they don't have to be grunts on the ground. And so like, oh, I just got to be smart and push buttons and turn some wrenches. Well, when a push comes to shove, you got to be a warrior. Like you got to get back up. You got to get in the fight. You got to save your shipmates. You got to return fire. You got to save that ship. And so we weren't training warriors. And so I literally got tapped with, it was myself, a clinical Navy psychologist, and a Navy chaplain, and said, hey, we want to create warriors in the Navy. The kind of warriors, you think about like going against the Japanese Imperial Navy in 1942, we need those kind of warriors because we may be facing the Russians, the Chinese, or other near-peer adversaries. And so we created a program centering around mind, body, soul. And so my contribution to that was to create a framework, how we plan, prepare, and execute in the SEAL teams. And within that framework, we can start looking at things such as character development. We can look at performance psychology, mindfulness training, that type of thing. And we can do it where we can actually go into practical exercises. And so we did all this. We created a program. We ran it through study and control groups, and we demonstrated that it was effective. And so I was actually asked to stay on an extra year to help export that program, which was in boot camp, to other areas of the Navy, ROTC, OCS, Navy Nuclear Power School, a couple other places like that. And now it continues to grow. I think the challenge is how you get the next, how you continue to build upon what's at boot camp. And I think as of now, they're still trying to figure that piece out.
Right. What do you see in some of the sailors come away with after having this training?
A lot more
tangible intangibles.
Yeah, so this is an interesting thing. So again, part of the study and control groups is you got to have people that are getting. So for example, at nighttime, we would do like a mindfulness exercise, right? And mindfulness, our ability to stay in the moment, right? To get distracted, but not get hijacked by distraction or emotions, be able to stay focused on the task at hand, be present. And then, so you'd have them doing that for, let's say, 10 minutes. Well, the division across the hall would be just sitting there quietly for 10 minutes without any training. So that would be your kind of your control group, right? And so we did that. And we also did, we did daily mindfulness exercises. And one of the centerpiece of that was a breathing exercise that we call mindfulness, or we call recalibrate. I'm sorry.
Okay.
So, there's a lot of things about breathing, but basically it's when you're in a high state of arousal or energy, it's kind of being able to lower that from that red zone, that fight, flight, or freeze, when you get super overwhelmed or distracted, and get down to where you can focus. And so we would teach them that breathing exercise called recalibrate. And when they were kind of like, spiraling, we tell that recruit to recalibrate. So eventually it becomes something that they can use on the fly on their own. In addition to that, we created what's called just-in-time performance psychology, sports psychology exercises. So for example, you're getting ready to do the swim test. Okay, we're going to go through visualization, like mental rehearsal. We're going to go through that arousal control. We're going to go through self-talk, create a script in your head to make you focus and give you confidence. And so we would teach those things. And what we found was higher levels, like in boot camp, you do what's called inspections, where you're being tested, you're being grilled on questions, and you're being screamed at. And so what we found is with the study groups, much higher levels of performance in those things, higher levels on the PFAs, which are your regular boot camp physical assessments. And the interesting thing, which we hadn't counted on, is what we call increased graduation, on-time graduation rates, meaning like a lot of times at boot camp, people will seek comfort. They'll want a timeout. So they'll maybe fake an illness or fake an injury so they can kind of get a breather. They can go to sick call and get a timeout. Well, what we found was, what happens is a lot of these, they get set back and they miss tests. And so they have to repeat. They get set back, which costs not only the Navy money, but it delays. Like if you need certain amount of recruits or new sailors in different positions in the fleet, you need to fill those seats. And so what we did, we increased on-time graduation rates. We had less and less sailors seeking that timeout and that comfort, saving the Navy money and getting to where they could relieve and basically fill the needed roles out in the fleet and the Navy. So that's what we found.
That's a really neat added benefit to this. When you originally came up with this idea, to create this warrior program, I mean, I'm sure that wasn't one of the goals.
Well, no, it was. Right? I mean, one of the.
But it came. Looking into it, it opened up and made them even tougher. So you now didn't have those delays. Does that make sense?
Yes, and that's exactly what it is. We're trying to train toughness, right? And we look at toughness versus resilience. A lot of times, resilience means different things to different people, but the classic definition, as I understand it, is our ability to get back. Right? We suffer adversity, we suffer maybe trauma. The more resilient we are, the greater ability we have to get back to where we were before. Now, the difference is, if I want you to be tough instead of resilient, I want you to show up and be able to actually perform. I don't care if you get back to where you were. It doesn't matter to me if you can't perform in the first place. So if you're tough, you're also going to be resilient, which means you're going to be able to face setback, challenge, trauma, adversity, and you're going to be able to come back to that point. Because, you think about, hey, we go to battle one day, we go to war, we do some combat operations. Okay, good. We performed. And now we're like, all right, well, yeah, I'm feeling pretty worked. Okay, but guess what? You're going to have to do it tomorrow and the next day and the next day. So we need that elevated level of sustained performance.
Oh, I love that. So tell me this again about the recalibrate, because I love that tool that people can pull out from their backpack, especially when somebody says, hey, sailor, recalibrate, right? And they know exactly what they need to do. What is that breathing cycle that helps them come down? Is it box breathing? Is it?
Yeah, you call it box breathing, but it's essentially how we would teach it. And I adjust the count when I teach people to do it, but how we would teach it was take a diaphragmatic breathing. So if I tell you to recruit or recalibrate, then you're going to inhale diaphragmatically, meaning you're going to inhale through your nose. And you're going to fill up your diaphragm, your upper belly. You're going to fill that, and then you're going to fill your lungs. You're going to do that for 6 seconds. You're going to pause and hold for 2 seconds. And then you're going to exhale through your mouth for 7 seconds, pause and hold for 2, and repeat. Now, we also, as we're training this, we introduce the mindfulness component of this, meaning, breathing is one of those things. If you ever do which I recommend, a mindfulness app, to the people listening, the reason people talk about breathing as a way to center is you can't breathe for yesterday, you can't breathe for tomorrow. If you're focusing on your breathing, it means you're focused on the here and now.
Oh, I love that.
Right? And a lot of times that's important because you don't want to start thinking about consequences of failure, of getting hurt or killed. You want to think about the things that enable your success in that moment. And so what I teach now is I just alter that from a 5-second inhalation to a 6-second. Now, what's critical here is not so much the count. That's like when you have your training wheels on. And so I recommend you can do that. There's apps that can help you with the count. It's more important that the breathing is long and slow. Because if you just do a sharp inhale without the long, slow exhale, you're actually going to increase that fight, flight, or freeze response because you're flooding more oxygen in there. So it's more important, rather than the count, that it's a long, slow inhale and a pause and a slightly longer exhale.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because that exhale is the key, and it has to be a long one. It can't be like you let it all out in 1 second, right? Because then you're right. It ruins the whole process of what you're trying to do. Something I like to do, and this helps me just fall asleep faster, is I put earplugs in, and usually by the time I roll over a couple times, the earplugs fall out. But what it enables me to do is I can hear myself breathe, right? So I can hear my inhales, I can hear my exhales, and I just kind of get in this nice little rhythm. Next thing I know, boom, I'm out.
Well, and I add to that. I say like if you're wanting to train recalibrate. So this is what I'm talking to when I coach this or teach this to corporate audiences, who's mostly who I speak to nowadays. I will always say, you want to have this as a tool. If I just tell you about it, you're not going to have it on demand unless you practice it. So the next time that jerk cuts you off in traffic, or you're a heated discussion with a loved one or with a coworker, you have the mindfulness to kind of break contact, right? Get off that X, recalibrate and use it, but you got to practice that. And so one of the things I say is at night, especially if you've had kind of your thoughts are racing, do 3 sets of 10 where you inhale and you count every exhalation breath to 10. Now, if you screw it up and you lose focus, you got to start back at 1. Okay. And so you do that, and eventually you're gonna not be able to do it anymore. And you're just gonna hopefully fall asleep.
Right. No, I like that. Yeah. That's really helpful because I mean, sleep's our number one recovery tool. The quicker you can get to sleep, the better you're going to be. Right. Otherwise, you're just going to spin yourself up and you're never going to fall asleep. You know, if you're letting the brain do what it shouldn't be doing at that period of the day.
And that also presumes good sleep hygiene, right? That's eliminating the blue light, before you go to bed. It's other things.
Yeah, not cool temperatures and
darkness. Yeah.
All right, so let's do this. Let's talk about what you are doing now. Like, what is a retired Master Chief of 20 plus years, former SEAL, doing now, and what's next?
Yeah, so just had the book come out the April. I don't know whenever this podcast launches, probably shortly, but I think April 5th, the book was launched on ebook and paperback. And then I just launched a couple weeks ago, the audio book. It's called Life on the X.
Life on the X. Okay. And Life on the X. I'm making a mark to get that. I have not seen that yet, but I will get it.
Well, I'll send you a copy.
What's it about?
It's the subtitle, A Navy SEAL's Guide to Meeting Any Challenge with Courage, Confidence, and Readiness. And essentially, it's a lot of the things that I just talked about with warrior toughness. And I wanted to make it into a business / kind of self-help book that tells a few stories from my military, but it's not just about my stories. It's not just about me. I also interview high performers in a variety of fields, top business leaders, CEOs, Olympic athletes, former professional athletes, and just say, okay, what are the things that they all have in common, and how can we take that and distill it down into a prescription where people can actually look and say, okay, because the title X comes from the military, right? When we're on that X, right? We want to land faster up onto the rooftop of a building we're assaulting. We refer to that as landing on the X. If we're moving down the street, we get ambushed. We're in that kill zone. That's the X as well. We got to get off that X. We got to maneuver. And so the X is just those critical moments, right? They're key opportunities. They are defining moments. They are business opportunities. They are showing up for your PST, right? It's those kind of things. Looking at them, being very clear on what success in that moment looks like, and then rewinding, as we said before, the left of the bang. We rewind and say, okay, how do I build that architecture for success? How do I set the table for my success, both in the skills, the knowledge, but also our mental capacity to be able to perform those things in the clutch when the pressure's really on. And so it's really about a lot of that to help people. And so I mean, shamelessly, I would recommend it. Obviously, to people
that's what this is for. I look forward to reading that one because, I have friends that are professional athletes that are, creators of their own inventions and CEOs. And there are some commonalities between all these different types of people. What was it that you found that maybe was something that you expected to be common and maybe something you didn't expect to be common in all these groups with, someone like yourself?
I think a lot of the things the thing that I expected them all to have in common is they're very, it goes without saying, if you're going to be the top of if you're going to sustain superior performance, it means that you have a level of drive and investment. Mm-hmm. So within that, they would be very intentional. So it's not just like, hey, I'm going to show up, I'm going to be awesome today. It's like, okay, what do I have today? All right. So one of the CEOs of Leo Burnett Advertising Group, he said, okay, because he's a former military guy. And those are the guys that I wanted to interview, the business leaders that had served in the military, to see what carried over. Nice. And he said, hey, as a CEO, it is very critical that you bring the right energy into a room. So you go into a room, maybe something's bad happened, it's in a crisis. Okay, the energy you bring in calms everybody down. Maybe there's some carelessness. Maybe there's some, some slacking off. Okay, well, I'm going to come in there with a little punch, maybe a little higher level of energy to get people to try to motivate them. I'm going to pick them up if that's required. It's just being very intentional. It's like, okay, these are the things that happen. What do I need to do? How do I optimize performance, right? We can't always have peak performance. I mean, we cannot always hit our personal best, but we're always capable of optimizing performance with our attitude, with our effort, with our intent. And I think probably the things that were less expected was a lot of the self-talk that went in, right? And I think what people may fail, especially for those of us that, those that, not us, but the younger listeners, is you see these people at the very top, whether they're celebrities, athletes, whatever it is, influencers. What you often don't realize is they have struggles too. They face doubt. They face setback. They have to really be cognizant of what they're feeding their brains, right? You wouldn't sit there and let somebody tell you you suck, you're a jerk, right? So don't say that to yourself. And these people, they were very good at putting the right thoughts in their head, performance psychology, performance statements, which is one of the things that I teach.
Man, I love that. So what are you doing now? You got the book, you got this app, Get Mental, that you and
Jason.
Yeah,
Jason Kyle.
Yeah. We just did a podcast, Tactical Fitness Report 234. We talk about this app that he's involved with, which is a lot of fun. You got to check out that podcast. But what are you doing outside of all that? Like,
so the things
where do you work?
Yeah, thanks for asking.
Yeah.
I do a limited amount of coaching. If the situation presents itself, and I think it's going to be a good fit. But what I really like doing, I like speaking. I like going out, and I think that's one of the areas that I probably had the biggest impact, was training other people from the podium as a SEAL instructor, because I got to do that in a variety of different ways during my career. So I like to go out there, and I typically talk to corporate audiences in the business world, a lot of sales, a lot of leadership training, to really say, hey, these things, I'm going to tell you some extreme stories about getting shot at, about high-risk training evolutions, but I'm going to show you why it's not as different as you might expect from the stressors and challenges that you face in your everyday life, right? Because we all have our moments on the X. And so it's a lot more similar than you might think. Here's how I can help you navigate it.
Oh, I love that. It's really amazing, after someone spends 20 plus years in the military, how many years they actually spend as a teacher.
That's right.
A good chunk of your career are teaching new guys the things that you know and the things that you've learned through experience, of what to do, what not to do in certain situations.
Well, and that's one of the, and people don't, it's not something that the Navy likes to sell, right? The Navy likes to talk and just show you videos of guys jumping out of planes and doing direct action missions and blowing things up and kicking in doors. But really, in special operations, at least for, in our core mission sets are very closely aligned with Army Special Forces. And that is, we are training, right? We grow the capacity and capability of a lot of host nation forces. So when we go into places like Iraq and Afghanistan, our ultimate goal is to always take a more and more distant role from the direct combat, because our primary focus is to grow those host nation forces. And it also provides us access and placement to other allies. And so I say all that to say that even as a new guy in the SEAL teams, you may go over and train, in a third world nation. You may actually, as a new guy on your first deployment, be tasked with instructing, with coming up with a lesson plan and teaching. And so in every deployment that I did, I was teaching someone something, whether it was teaching other SEALs or it was teaching other partner forces. We were teaching something. And so you learn how to do that. And so to your point, yes, at every level, you're learning how to teach people.
That's awesome. So you have any, as a teacher, you have any last bit of advice for us as we wrap this up?
And I'll just go with what I mentioned. Take a beat before you jump in with both feet on a goal or a situation. Read the battlefield, read the terrain, set aside agendas, and do what's best in that moment. identify what your X is. Identify what success looks like. Identify what could go wrong. And ultimately identify what it's going to take for you to optimize perform in that situation. Right. And so that's, I think, going to be the biggest thing that I can impart.
That's really cool. Well, one last thing. Where can people find you, find more information about what you are doing and, where, what the book is and all that?
Yeah, no, yeah. Life on the X is, you can find that anywhere online books are sold, or, audio books, etc. Amazon.
Yep.
And you can go to my website if you'd like to talk to me about speaking, or if you just want to follow some of my content. I'm going to be putting more and more free content up there. And that's StephenDrum.com, StephenDrum.com. You can also follow me on Stephen.drum on Instagram. I keep it simple. And Stephen Drum on LinkedIn. That's my two primary platforms.
Well, what I will do in the description of this podcast is I will put all those links in the description. So if you guys forget, you just go to the description. You'll be able to see where you can find Master Chief Steve Drum. So, hey, man, once again, thanks for taking an hour and sharing your journey. I think it's going to be really helpful for some young recruit out there, but also maybe even an older guy in business that needs a little bit of self-awareness and understanding, stress management and things like that. So I appreciate your time.
Hey, thanks so much, Stu, for having me on. This was a blast.
All right, folks. You guys check out Steve Drum at his website, StephenDrum.com.
That's right.
All right.
With a PH.
Yeah, let's go. We'll see you later.